My name's Nigel Fife. I'm a member of AWARE's education and training team. And as I say, you're all very welcome this morning. So again, a little bit about the session, folks. And the next hour, these are the main areas we're going to cover. This program is based on our Mood Matters Workplace program. That's one of AWARE's portfolio of training programs designed for workplaces and organisations throughout Northern Ireland. We're going to look at sort of 4 or 5 core areas today, and as I say, then we will follow it up with further information. We're going to start at the beginning and discuss what we actually mean by mental health. We're going to talk a wee bit about the impact of mental health from a workplace point of view. We're going to be very clear and define what we mean by mental ill health, as opposed to maybe a mental health problem that we will all experience from time to time. We'll talk about some of the key issues that people are experiencing in Northern Ireland and the impact of work on those potential issues. And then we'll go on to look at some of the ways we can maintain good levels of mental health, address mental health issues, lots of self-help and coping strategies included in there. And then we'll also finish off with some other sources of help and support if those techniques just aren't enough for you. And then we'll finish off just with a wee bit more general information about AWARE as an organisation, what other services that we can offer individuals and organisations. And as I say, then anything we don't have time to cover today will be included in the follow-up information. If anybody has any technical issues, as I say, just a reminder, we are recording the session, so don't panic. You will still be able to see the full session at a slightly later date. So folks, starting at the beginning, what do we mean by mental health? Well, folks, it's quite simply everything that's going up here in our minds. It's how healthy our mind is, how well it's been working. It's about our thoughts and feelings. It's about how we deal with the ups and downs of life. You don't need to be told life's a bit of a roller coaster with peaks and troughs, and that's perfectly normal. It's how we process all those life events and those swings in our mood that can dictate how our mental health is going. And what affects our mental health? Pretty much everything that life throws at us, everyone. Everything from our environment to our physical health to getting a little bit older, you know, the bills coming in, relationships, kids, work, all these life events, everything that life throws at us impacts on our mental health. And those are things that we can't control. What we can control is in how we deal with those issues when they arrive. And work is one of those issues, folks. It's a major part of our lives. You know, we spend a lot of time at work. We spend more time with our work colleagues. Sometimes it feels like, on our family and friends. It's a big part of our lives, and therefore it has a big impact on our lives. The good news is there's lots of real positives from a workplace point of view. Some of the elements of work that are really beneficial to our mental health. You know, it can give you a sense of purpose. It can boost your self-esteem. It can give people a bit of a buzz, and you get to learn new skills. You create new relationships with your colleagues, and can give you a sense of achievement. And of course, we get paid. And so there's lots of positives to work in terms of our mental health. But there are also challenges, and it's important to acknowledge that as well. Depending on what your role is, depending on what's been going on in your particular workplace, you might not be necessarily see the purpose in your role. You might not get on particularly well with your colleagues. For some people, learning new skills and things like that can be quite stressful. It can be very disruptive for family life. We work throughout Northern Ireland in a range of different organisations, different companies. I was recently in a company that worked 3 shift patterns, for example. Obviously, that can be very disruptive for family life, and the people who were working night shift were having a very different experience to the people who were having day shift and working the day shift. So that could be, quite a disruptive type of working to take on board. Some people might feel undervalued where they work, and they might feel there's just, there's too much or too little to do. And a lack of job security is also a major factor in some of the challenges associated with work and mental health. So it's important to acknowledge that there are positives and potential challenges from a workplace point of view when it comes to, maintaining good mental health and looking after our mental health. Moving on, just to talk a little bit about what we mean by mental ill health. And I mentioned right at the beginning, this is quite an important thing. Everybody here, everybody who's listening and everybody who receives this information, we will all experience mental health problems at some stage. It's just a natural part of life. As you can see there, a mental health problem can disrupt how we think, feel and behave, not so severe enough to warrant a diagnosis of a mental disorder. Organisations like AWARE, we exist to try and prevent a mental health problem from developing into something more serious than mental disorder by educating people, by making them aware of what the issues are, how you can address those issues. A mental disorder is something that's diagnosable. It's a diagnosable illness that causes major changes in how we think, feel and behave, and can have a major change on our lives as a whole. So everything that we talk about from a self-help point of view, from a help and support point of view, is trying to prevent anybody who's experienced a mental health problem from allowing that to develop into something much more serious. Now, we're not going to bombard you with statistics today, but it's important to kind of set the context as far as mental health in Northern Ireland goes. We do have the highest prevalence of mental health in the UK, with 25% higher overall prevalence than England, for example. Lots of reasons why that's the case, lots of socioeconomic reasons, and the legacy of the Troubles is also a major factor, still recognised having a significant impact on mental health in Northern Ireland, both for people who were directly impacted by the impact of that period, but also people who were indirectly impacted and generationally impacted by that period as well. Anxiety and depression is also 25% more common in children and young people in Northern Ireland compared to other parts of the UK, which itself is quite a high statistic. And I'll draw your attention to the stat in the bottom left of this slide. In short, what it's telling us is that we receive about 30% less funding per head per year in terms of mental health services in Northern Ireland. So when you combine that with that 25% overall prevalence, that shows you that there's a massive gap here, a massive gap that organisations like Aware are trying to fill. We've got some very, very good statutory services, but they just don't have the resources that they need to deal with the demand that's out there. So that's where, like I say, organisations like Aware and our services hope to fill a lot of those gaps and help people along that journey into getting help and support. Also on the top right there, you'll notice that statistic: 1 in 5 people in Northern Ireland report feeling lonely always or often, representing almost 400,000 people. Again, depending on the types of organisations we work in, I'm working with one organisation at the moment who works in the agriculture industry. Isolation, loneliness, and suicide ideation is a major factor in the agriculture industry, and it makes perfect sense for those of you who live in more rural areas and know people from the farming community from the background. You have a lot of people who work in that line of work who maybe don't get to see people, for days at a time, depending on what they're doing. So depending on the type of organization, depending on the type of workload, depending on the type of work sector that they're involved in, there could be a range of different issues that people are experiencing. In terms of workplace statistics, again, you can see almost 18 million working days were lost to stress, anxiety, and depression in 2019-2020 in the UK. It represents almost half of all work-related illness. So mental health, again, is a major contributing factor to people not being able to attend work. And in some cases, people who are in work who maybe are not well enough to be in work. So again, that's one of the key reasons why organizations and workplaces really should take mental health as serious as possible, not just from a duty of care point of view, but from a business perspective as well. As you can see in the bottom right there, mental health problems cost the NI economy £3.5 billion annually. So, from a business perspective and from a duty of care perspective, it makes really good sense to look at mental health in a serious manner, no matter what size your organization is. So this little diagram, folks, whenever we are experienced by all those life events, a number of things happen to us. We go into a cycle of behavior. This little diagram kind of helps demonstrate what that cycle is. It's taken from a CBT model. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it features heavily in a lot of our training programs and services. It's called the 5 areas approach. So basically, when all those life events are thrown at us, so the bills piling in, the kids are playing up and the relationships aren't going so well, the first thing we usually do is we think about those events. When we think about those events, if our thinking is negative, it will impact how we feel in a negative way. In turn, that will impact on us in terms of how we behave, and the physical results can also be then quite negative. This is what we call in CBT terms a vicious circle. A lot of our programs are designed to encourage people how we can challenge that vicious circle and turn it into something more productive, what we would call a virtuous circle. And there's 2 main areas we can do that, which we'll talk about a little later this morning. We can impact how we think about events, and we can impact how we behave. We can't impact how we feel. How we feel is just how we feel, and we can't impact the physical results. So later, when we're looking at self-help techniques and strategies, we'll be focusing on those 2 areas. So just wanted to show you that diagram at this stage, because we will be referring back to it in the remaining 45 minutes or so as we go along. And if anybody's interested after the talk and finding out more about CBT techniques, again, we'll send you further information, and that will be included in the follow-up information anyway. And it is also something you can access through your GP as well, if it's something you think is particularly helpful for you. So what are the main issues, folks, that we're all experiencing? Well, it's probably no surprise to learn stress is number one. Stress is top of the list. It's one of the most common mental health issues that people are experiencing, especially from a workplace point of view. And there's lots of definitions of stress out there. I quite like this one. This one's from the Health and Safety Executive, Northern Ireland. The adverse reaction a person has to excessive pressure or other types of demand placed upon them. And the reason I like it is because it includes the word pressure. Pressure in itself isn't a negative thing. Pressure can be really positive. It can help us if we're trying to, if we have a couple of work deadlines coming up, if you're playing a big cup final at the weekend, if, like my son, you're going through sort of A levels at the minute. It focuses the attention, to get you ready for action. So pressure itself is not a negative thing, but when that pressure exceeds our ability to cope, that's when stress can become very debilitating, both from a mental health point of view and a physical health point of view. So when something happens that causes a stressful situation, we refer to that as acute stress. Something happens, and when that does happen, we react in a certain way. And you've probably heard of the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is something that's been with us as human beings as far back as human beings have existed, and we can chat how long that is. We could chat about that all day. But back in the early days of human existence, the fight or flight response had a very specific role to keep us alive, and it was that simple. It was a protective mechanism. It kicked in. The problem with the fight or flight response is that it hasn't really evolved with the rest of us, so it hasn't really learned to distinguish between being chased by a woolly mammoth and singing a karaoke song for the first time. That kind of stress response is the same for both events, and that's okay. But if you're finding yourself in that stress response mode too often and for too much of the time, that can be extremely exhausting, debilitating, and have serious long-term impacts for people. So it's important to understand what happens to us when we're stressed out. I like to visualize stress as if you think of yourself as an empty jug, folks, an empty water jug. So let's say it's Monday morning and you've had a great weekend, and you have no stress whatsoever going to work on Monday morning. Chance would be a fine thing, but let's, for the sake of this example, we'll go with that. And then as the week progresses, the jug will start to fill up. It will start to fill up with work issues. It'll start to fill up with relationship issues. It'll start to fill up with the bills. Maybe you're having to care for someone at a particular time. Maybe you've experienced a bereavement. Maybe you're physically unwell. All these issues will start to fill the jug up. Going back to the point about pressure, as long as there's gap in the jug, that means the pressure is not exceeding your ability to cope, so you're okay. It's when the jug starts to overflow, that's when things can become very problematic. Then we're looking at something like episodic acute stress, when you're having more and more of these issues repeating themselves. Your jug is filling and filling up. And if you don't take steps to deal with that and find a way to empty your jug, for want of a better phrase, it can develop into something much more serious like chronic stress. And that's what we're seriously trying to avoid. In terms of what to look for in terms of stress symptoms, it varies for different people. Lots of people are impacted by stress in different ways. But again, using our little example, our CBT example, the 5 areas approach, here are some examples of the sort of symptoms you might be experiencing. We could spend the next 45 minutes just talking about stress symptoms. It's that complicated, but these are the sort of things you might be thinking if you're under a lot of stress. I'm not coping well. I'm feeling useless. Something's bound to go wrong. Everybody else is coping. Why can't I? It's all my fault. You might be feeling more worried, more agitated, a little more irritable than under normal circumstances, experiencing mood swings, might be feeling a bit more indecisive than under normal circumstances. And it might affect you from a work point of view. It might be affecting your work performance. You might be taking more time off than under normal circumstances. You might find you're arguing with colleagues, maybe avoiding people, and you might find you're using alcohol or substances a bit more than under normal circumstances. And from a physical point of view, again, there's so many physical symptoms of stress: palpitations, nausea, headaches, mental exhaustion, a feeling of being an inability to cope, sweaty palms, knots in your stomach. We could go on and on and on. And as I say, some people are affected by different ways. The important message is with stress, folks, as far as I'm concerned, there's sort of three points. One is understanding what stresses you the most, understanding what your stress triggers are, in other words, on having a list of really good techniques that you can use to de-stress. Look out for symptoms that are becoming more regular and more severe. Those are the kind of key areas when it comes to stress that you want to be identifying, and not just in yourself, in the people around you, your friends, your family, your colleagues. If you know people well enough, you'll start to notice changes in their personality, changes in their behavior. You might be able to notice straight away if someone's just maybe feeling the impact of stress a lot more than under normal circumstances. And we'll talk a lot more about techniques a little bit later, but I'm just going to mention very quickly. Do not underestimate the power of simple exercises like breathing techniques when it comes to de-stressing yourself, especially if you're just having a very stressful day. You just need to empty your jug, a little bit, just to get through that next afternoon and the next couple of meetings, whatever it may be. This particular breathing exercise, 478 breathing, is a really effective way of just being able to, bring yourself down a couple of notches on the scale. There's lots of reasons why breathing exercises help with stress, but it just tends to slow the central nervous system down when you increase your oxygen intake. Those of you who like to go out for a cigarette to calm down, that's all well and good, but just to let you know, nicotine is actually a stimulant, which means it speeds up your central nervous system. If you go outside and just take 10 deep breaths, that'll do equally well. It's because when you smoke a cigarette, you're actually intaking up to 8 times more oxygen than under normal circumstances. It gives you the impression of calming down. So the deep breathing will work. I'm not saying don't have your cigarette, but I'm just saying from a de-escalating the stress point of view, good breathing exercises work really well. This one's really good. You breathe in for 4, you hold for 7, slowly release for 8 out of the mouth. I'll let you guys all practice this after the session, but I just wanted to flag it up. And there's lots of information out there around breathing exercise, lots of free information. You can try different ones, find out what works, but they're very, very effective in terms of, reducing short-term stress if you're in a situation where you just need to, buy yourself a bit of time. And as I said, when it comes to stress, what we're trying to do is prevent stress developing into something more serious like an anxiety disorder. And anxiety disorders are significantly more severe than stress, much more persistent, much more long lasting. In some cases, people can, be with them for life once diagnosis has been made. They interfere obviously, with an individual's ability to work, to sustain relationships, the major players in life. So, everything we can do to try and recognize stress, understand what's happening to us when we are stressed, and understanding what we can do to de-stress is really, really vitally important. We do run dedicated stress management workshops as well, if anybody's interested in that from an individual or organizational point of view. Again, I'll refer back to those at the end of this morning's session, but just wanted to mention that if it's something that's particularly impacting your organization, you'd like to look at it in a bit more detail, we can certainly look at that for you. And that moves us on to looking at depression, folks. And if anybody's ever seen an aware poster anywhere, around any of the towns, cities, and villages in the country, we'll probably see the tagline, the Depression Charity for Northern Ireland. That's how Aware started. Aware started back in 1996, up in the Northwest Derry, Londonderry, as a bunch of concerned people who were really concerned about the issues around depression in their area. That's how the organisation started. And as I say, we're now about to celebrate our 30th year. Depression, according to the World Health Organization, folks, it's more than the normal feelings of sadness that we all experience from time to time. It's a common mental illness that affects our thinking, feelings, behaviour, and physical well-being. The tagline that they've added here as well, the illness is sometimes referred to as clinical depression. Symptoms last for at least 2 weeks. It's very, very difficult when it comes to, one of the most common questions when we talk about depression is, how long should I be experiencing low mood before it can be, labelled as depression? There's no hard and fast answer to that. You'd be hard pushed to find any medical expert who'll give you an exact, because again, it varies from person to person depending on a number of factors. But the reason we've included this tagline from the World Health Organization, as a general guideline, everybody will experience ups and downs depending on how life's going. We'll all have bad days, we'll all have bad weeks, we'll all have periods where things are not going well and our mood is low. When our mental health is in a good place, a solid place, we will normally bounce back up again. Our resilience levels are good enough that we'll bounce back up to that, better mood. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're experiencing low mood for more than a couple of weeks and you're finding it more and more difficult to feel that bounce up effect, that's one of the big indicators that maybe something else is going on, a slightly more serious nature. Maybe it's time to have a conversation with someone who's close to you, GP, whoever it may be, an organization like us. So anything more than a couple of weeks is not considered normal. And if you're experiencing that or you're aware of that in someone else, again, as I say, that could be a big indicator that maybe something else is going on. And a bit like stress, I mean, we could talk about symptoms of depression, what to look out for, for the next half an hour, no problem. But again, these are some of the examples that you might want to look for. For example, these are the sort of symptoms you might be thinking: I'm feeling useless, I find it difficult to make decisions, loss of concentration, in extreme cases, suicidal ideation, thoughts of suicide. The sort of feelings you'll be experiencing: low mood, sadness, loss of enjoyment, lack of confidence, feeling more anxious or worried than under normal circumstances. The loss of enjoyment ones is quite a key one as well. What they're actually referring to is a loss of enjoyment in things you normally would find enjoyable. So if you're starting to find yourself, you're turning down that Friday coffee with a friend that you never miss, or you're missing football training 3 or 4 sessions in a row, and it's become, it started to be noticed. If you're starting to lose enjoyment in things you normally would find enjoyable, combining that with that low mood, again, that's a big indicator that maybe something else a little bit more serious is going on in the background. It's a good one to look out for in yourself, but also in, as I say, in other friends, colleagues, etc. If you're noticing those changes, could be worth having a wee conversation and seeing where that goes. And then from a behavior point of view, you might find you're eating less or more. You could be sleeping too much or too little. You might find you're avoiding people more than under normal circumstances. You could find that you're struggling to control your temper, losing your temper more often. And from a physical point of view, you might be more exhausted and tired than normal circumstances, experiencing aches and pains, losing, gaining weight, nausea. This is a good point to mention, folks. I'm going to tell you how old I am. I'm 54. Why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because when you're 54, you're exhausted and tired quite a lot of the time. I'm sort of struggling with a bad back at the moment, so I've got a lot of aches and pains at the minute. I can hear the little violins coming out now. But again, I'm not experiencing depression. So the point I'm making is when it comes to depression, you're looking for patterns in symptoms. You're looking for the severity of those symptoms if you're having more and more symptoms. So we will all experience low mood from time to time. As I say, we'll all experience aches and pains. But if you're starting to see a pattern forming in terms of the number of symptoms that you're experiencing, the severity of those symptoms, how often those symptoms are being experienced, again, those are 3 big indicators when it comes to depression. Maybe it's just not low mood I'm experiencing right now. Maybe it's actually something a little bit more serious. And where depression differentiates itself slightly from stresses, there are other factors that come into play as well. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that hereditary issues come into play. So if it is something that's experienced quite a lot in your family, again, that's something to keep an eye on. Everybody's individual life experience are going to have an impact on their susceptibility to developing depression as well. So if you've experienced trauma at a young age, etc., all these things will have an impact on you from a life experiences point of view, and may make you more susceptible to symptoms of depression or diagnosable depression itself. And don't underestimate the environment as well, folks. I mean, if you cast your mind back to 2020, and we went through the pandemic period, like a lot of organizations, a lot of us were sent home for a number of weeks. And I remember it very well. It was sort of end of March, start of May, April 2020. Anybody who was there remembers that. I don't know if you remember, but the sun shone for about 4 or 5 weeks solid. I was sent home, and I were lucky to have a 3-bedroom semi with a bit of a garden. We spent 4 or 5 weeks in the garden having picnics, and my son and I invented about 40 new sports. Everything came out of the garage. We had breakfast, lunch, and tea together. It was actually quite a pleasant experience while the world was going through turmoil outside. One of my best friends lives a quarter of a mile from me. He lives on the 13th floor of a tenement building. He had a very, very different experience to that first 4 or 5 weeks. So don't underestimate the impact of your environment in terms of how it impacts your mental health, and especially impacts your mood. And there are also people who, from a personality point of view, are also just more prone to low mood and more prone to symptoms of depression. So again, if you know those people, if you care for those people, if they're friends, family, colleagues, those are people also to keep an eye on. You may notice changes in their behavior, changes in their personality at that particular time, little indicators that maybe something's not quite right. And again, that may be a great indicator. It's time to maybe have a conversation. So, folks, on to a lot of the good news. The good news is there's lots of really good, simple things that we can do to look after our mental health, to maintain good levels of mental health, to address mental health issues should they arise. And then if you need extra help and support as well, we're going to point you in that direction as well. Again, going back to our CBT diagram, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, there's 2 key areas that we focus on when it comes to self-help and support. One is how we think about what the events that happen to us, and secondly, how we behave when those events happen. And those are the areas that we can impact. Those are the areas that we can get involved with to interrupt that cycle of behavior, that vicious circle that we referred back to earlier in the talk. From a thinking point of view, if we think about an event and it's unhelpful, that then kicks that spiral off in the wrong direction. Unhelpful thinking styles are very common. We've listed quite a number of the main ones here. So you may notice some of some of these in your own behavior or in people you know, in friends, family, colleagues. The catastrophizers, the people who jump to the worst conclusions. One thing goes wrong and they're immediately jump into the worst case scenario. Mind readers kind of assume what other people are thinking. So, you're walking down the corridor and one of your colleagues passed, you say hello, they don't reply, and then by the time you go back to your desk, you've constructed a whole reason in your head, well, why did they not talk to me? Is that because I didn't go for coffee the other day? Is it because I missed that meeting? Maybe it's because I didn't get that report in time. It could have been just they were looking at their phone, just didn't hear you. But mind readers, obviously, they assume what others are thinking and go for the worst case scenario. People who focus on the negative, as dark tinted glasses wearers, as we call them, people who are their own worst critics, people who are very hard on themselves, people with a gloomy view of the future, people who set impossible standards. From a sporting analogy, the Messis and Ronaldos of the world, it's never enough. They're always setting the standards higher and higher. And people who take responsibility for everything. I call those parents, but that's just because I'm a parent. But you'll know those type of people. We'll all know people who have some of these characteristics based, built into their personalities. And as I say, you might recognize some of these in yourself. What in a lot of our programs and a lot of our support services, as I say, we focus on CBT techniques that are designed to change that unhelpful thinking into more positive thinking, and that in turn can enable us to deal with those life events in a more positive manner and set that spiral of behavior off on a positive loop rather than a negative loop. And as I say, we will not go into it in too much detail here today, but a lot of our programs go into this CBT, these techniques in a lot of detail and much more detail. So again, if it's something you think it's interesting for you, or you know someone who may benefit from them, again, we'll be sending you some follow-up information, how you can look into that in a little bit more detail. And then the other key area that we can focus on is our behavior, folks. And there's, again, the good news is there's lots of really simple things that we can do to build into our daily lifestyles or daily routines to help us maintain good levels of mental health, to help us address mental health issues. You might have seen the 5 steps to wellbeing posters and as part of the PHA's campaign for a while now. But just for those of you unfamiliar with it, it's 5 very, very simple evidence-based messages that we're trying to encourage people to adopt and incorporate into their daily routines that have been, as I say, they're evidence-based. They've proven to work when it comes to maintaining good levels of mental health and addressing mental health issues. I'm a science type of guy. I like science. I like logic. I like facts and figures, like evidence. So, this is why we feel it's a really beneficial campaign to get behind and promote and encourage people to be part of. So to give you an example, being active. Now, being active doesn't mean everybody has to be out running marathons. Everybody has their own capabilities. But from a scientific point of view, when we exercise, folks, the body creates serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It's a neurotransmitter that controls our mood. It's a good thing. A lot of people who experience depression have got low levels of serotonin, for example. Exercise helps the body naturally produce serotonin. So again, one of the first things anybody will be discussed with, no matter what sort of therapy you're involved with, they'll ask people if they can be a bit more active, because there's science behind it. It works. It's quite simple. As they say, you don't have to be out, playing football matches every night, but it could be just, taking the stairs instead of the escalator when you're in the shopping center. It could be an extra 10 minutes walking the dog, or it could be, whacking the heck out of a punch bag for 10 minutes out in the garage. Whatever works for you, whatever your capabilities are, if that's possible, we very much promote being active as much as possible. But if that's not a possibility for you, there are lots of other areas to focus on as well. And when we talk about connecting, we're talking about connecting with people around us. Human beings are naturally drawn to each other. I know it doesn't seem like it sometimes when you watch the news, but we are. We're naturally tribal. We come together, we congregate together, we live together. We like being around each other. There are times when we certainly just want to be by ourselves, but in general, we like that contact. If you think of yourself as a dot in the middle, and then you have a series of concentric circles moving outwards, all the people the people in that first circle, those are the people you want to try and keep your connections open with at all times. Those are the people who, during that COVID period, for example, the pandemic period, it became increasingly difficult for people to keep those connections open because of the restrictions everybody was under. It's vitally important that we keep those connections open, that we talk to each other. And that's usually quite a small number of people, folks, in that first circle. We're not talking about the very outer circle, all the numbers on your social media accounts. They're not really, friends. They're contacts. We're talking about the people who are close to you. We're talking about the people who, when the situation is not good, there's usually 2 or 3 phone numbers that we're going to call, folks, and usually it's not too many more than that. So keep those connections open as much as possible, especially if you've got people living abroad. Drop them a message once in a while. You just don't know what's going on in people's lives. Having that avenue, having that someone to talk to share with is vitally important, especially if you're experiencing issues with mental health. You just want someone to trust that you can have a conversation with to share that, and that can start you off on a journey to get the help and support that you need. We saw the impact of what happened when those connections were severed back in 2020, 2022. I'm originally from Oma in Tyrone. My mother still lives there. She comes from a really, really big family. When you go to my mother's house, there's always lots of people, cousins, aunties, uncles in there. When that was removed from her, it hit her really hard. Thankfully, we were able to get around that by introducing her to FaceTime and Zoom and Teams as that generation kicked off back in 2020, 2021. And so she was able to keep those connections open that way. And we now have a generation of people of that age group who are now have access to a lot of these tools they probably wouldn't have had before. So I like to think of that as a positive that came out of that negative period. The negative side of it is she can now find me anywhere in the world at any time, at any moment. But sure, that's what I have to live with. And that's not a big price to pay. So keep those connections open, folks. Keep those lines of communication open as much as possible. It's absolutely vital. And keep learning, folks. Again, from an evidence-based point of view, the more we learn, the more we push ourselves. It boosts our self-esteem. It gives us confidence. It makes us feel good about ourselves. Again, we don't all have to be out studying degrees, but it could be just that guitar course you ever always wanted to try. It could be those cooking lessons, or you've always wanted to learn a bit of Italian, whatever it may be. But keeping ourselves pushing, keeping our brains active is a really positive way in looking after our mood and our emotional well-being. And it's proven to, as I say, boost confidence, boost self-esteem. Which is a real positive thing when looking after our mental health. From a take notice point of view, if you can get outside, folks, if you're lucky enough to have access to anywhere to go for a nice walk, woodlands, whatever it may be, get outside as much as we can, weather permitting. We were lucky to have a great summer by our standards, and then we just got hit really hard in September there, where it just feels like it rained completely the whole month of September. So hopefully we're going to a wee bit more settled weather now, but if we can get out and about, it's really good for us from a mental health point of view. Take the time to kind of focus on the present rather than, what has to happen next and what's happened before. Human beings process about 60,000 thoughts a day, and only about a third of those thoughts are concerned about what's actually happening right now. We're continually worrying about what's just happened and what has to happen next. So being able to get involved with mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques that teach us to focus on the present and give our minds a bit of a break from all that other stuff that's happening in the background is a real beneficial way to keeping our stress levels down, keeping our emotional well-being in a good place as well. And finally, give. It could be anything from just giving someone a smile, passing them on the street, to helping your elderly neighbour with a shopping, whatever it may be. Again, you will get as much out of that transaction as the person you were helping from an emotional well-being point of view. So wherever you time, let's be kind to each other. Let's help each other out. Let's, not just the people and who spend time with, but the people you meet on the street. You never know what sort of day they're having. So a smile and a hello and a good morning can go a long way. So again, the 5 ways to wellbeing, folks, it's a very simple way. And from an organizational point of view, there's lots of information out there how you can incorporate this into your organization as well, folks. So again, if anybody's interested in that, please get in touch and we'll happily assist you with that as well. From a working from home point of view, folks, a lot of organizations are working hybrid systems now. So very quickly, I just want to mention a couple of things about that. Again, lots of positives about working from home. As an organization, we have a hybrid working system now since the pandemic as well, and it's working very, very productively. But there's also some challenges along with working from home for some people, especially if you're quite isolated or you work in rural areas or you're used to having that contact of people around you. So from a work point of view, working from home point of view, we'd strongly encourage try and keep the routine up. The same sort of routine that you would have in the office, having a clear working area. Getting yourself up and work ready as you normally would. And then if you have extra time in your hands, so for example, you normally commute, you might have an extra 30, 45 minutes that you can actually do something nice before you actually start work. So keeping those routines open is very important. From a disconnecting rituals point of view, things like taking proper breaks is really important. Taking a break from working from home is not taking the laptop off your knee and setting it beside you. It's removing yourself. It's getting yourself outside. It's going to a different room. It's taking a proper break, just like you would if you were in the workplace. Make sure you put your work items away at the end of the day. having a laptop and paperwork sitting out there and is a dangerous game to play when it's 7 o'clock and you go, I just wonder, did they get back to me about that little message I sent? And you just go, I'll just check that out, and then you disappear down a rabbit hole. An hour and a half, 2 hours later, you're still going through emails and sending replies. So make sure you put your work items away, so you're completely separating that work time and home time as much as possible. So again, there's lots of advice and guidance out there around that if that's something that's particularly interesting and useful for your organization. And we're strongly encouraging people to try to engage in activities that give you a sense of closeness, achievement, and pleasure at some point in the day. We call this getting your cap on. Now it can be very difficult because everybody's busy. We understand the pressures on workplaces are it's not getting any lower. People seem to have less and less time for themselves and less time for their friends, families, and colleagues. So it's so important that we try to take a wee bit of personal responsibility from an individual point of view to try and factor these things in, even if it's just 20 minutes, half an hour at the end of the day, to touch base with that person, that friend, that family member. Be proud of what you've achieved that particular day. It's okay to give yourself a slap in the back. We're always very hard on ourselves as individuals. It's okay to say, no, I did well today. I got everything done that I wanted to do, and factor in the pleasure, folks. Whether that's a Netflix program, whether it's just walking the dog, whether it's back out hitting the punch bag for 10 minutes again, whatever it does, a quiet room and a good book. We got to factor these things in our daily routine, folks. And remember what I was saying about the jug. We got to keep the jug empty as much as possible. Create that space so that we can go ahead today, tomorrow, the next day, and look in a week or two ahead. So try and focus on these things as much as we possibly can. I know it's challenging at times, but do your best to try and focus as many of these into our daily routines as much as possible. And then from other self-help point of view, again, we have a wealth of information that we can go into in lots of our other programs. I'm going to touch on a couple of things here. I am going to mention caffeine and alcohol and substances because it's such an important element when we talk about mental health. Caffeine, for example, caffeine is the most widely used drug in the world, and caffeine is what they call a stimulant drug. There's four main categories of drugs. Caffeine is a stimulant. Stimulants basically speed up your central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord. That's your central nervous system, and caffeine speeds it up. That's why we like it. That's why we like it in the morning. That's why we like it at tea break. That's why we like it in the afternoon to give us a wee kick. Anybody, as I mentioned, who likes a cigarette as well, a cigarette and a coffee, you're getting a wee double blast of caffeine as well. So again, that's why it's so popular. That's all great and that's all well and good. But if you're experiencing high levels of stress, for example, caffeine is not a particularly useful substance to be using as much as possible because, again, your central nervous system is already in a heightened state. Adding substances into your system that are continuing to speed up and exacerbate and exaggerate those symptoms is not a good thing to do. So if you are going through a period where you're experiencing high levels of stress or higher levels of stress than you normally would, try and factor in your caffeine intake, maybe reduce it, switch to decaf, whatever it may be, and try and switch off the caffeine in the evenings as well. The recommended intake for caffeine, folks, is about 400 milligrams a day. Equates to about 4 cups of coffee, depending on how big your cup is, I suppose. But 4 regular cups of coffee. If you're exceeding that greatly, I don't drink tea or coffee, but I drink Coca-Cola. I get my caffeine from there. We all like caffeine. It's useful in getting us energy and giving us a kick, but understanding what it does to us, especially if we're experiencing high levels of stress, is important. And then from alcohol is very much part of our cultural makeup in this country. I don't have to explain that to anybody. We don't have to find a reason to have a drink. But again, everything in moderation is the message. Alcohol is the opposite to a stimulant. It's what they call a depressant. So it means it depresses the central nervous system. It slows it down. Anybody who's out for a drink at night and has a few drinks will understand the pattern. You get that buzz at the beginning of the night, and then things start to slow as the night progresses, and your balance, your mood, your speech, all become your balance, all become affected and slowed down. And usually it ends up with sleep. And not sleep in the traditional sense, which is why we don't feel great the next morning. So again, if you're going through a pretty rough time and your mood is low, alcohol again is not particularly a friendly substance to be using because again it will exaggerate and add to those symptoms that you're experiencing. Unfortunately, it's one of the things we do turn to when things are not going well. So that's where it's very important to understand what it does to us, what it's doing to us, in partner with those other symptoms you're experiencing, and trying our best to avoid it as much as possible if we are experiencing low mood and symptoms of depression particularly. And from a prescription medication point of view, folks, in Northern Ireland we have a major issue with prescription medications in terms of how often they're being used and how easy they are to access. Again, depending on what's going on in your life and what sort of state your mental health is in that particular time, certain medications can be quite dangerous. So if you're experiencing high levels of stress, for example, and you go to the GP, they may prescribe you a drug from the range of drugs called benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines are pretty much any drugs that end in a pam, diazepam, temazepam, those types of drugs. And they're designed again to slow your central nervous system down to de-stress situations. They're also prescribed for things like insomnia and issues like that as well. Again, they're very effective at what they do, but they're only effective in the short term. So after only 2 or 3 weeks of using benzodiazepines, they will actually start to cause symptoms, some of the symptoms that they're designed to treat, and which is why people end up then moving up through the dosage ranges. And I mention them because they are, the dependency on benzodiazepine drugs is very, very common, not just in Northern Ireland and countries all around the world. So again, just be very careful about what you're taking, what you're using. Ask your GP questions like, how long should I be using this for? When do I need to review it? Is it okay to have a glass of wine? All those sorts of questions that we don't usually ask. And most of us don't read the little leaflets that come in the boxes, mostly because it's so small. Even with my reading glasses, you can't read them. But having a knowledge base around what these substances are, what they're doing is very, very important. So again, highly recommend as organizations. There's lots of information out there where you can build your knowledge base around alcohol, substances, what it does to us, how it impacts us from a physical health point of view and from a mental health point of view. It's very, very important. We mentioned exercise briefly earlier. Don't underestimate the impact of diet as well, what we're eating. For example, if you're experiencing lots of low mood or you've been diagnosed with depression, we all like a takeaway, but any type of food that has high levels of trans fats, which takeaways do, trans fats are scientifically directly linked to symptoms of depression. So again, those are the sort of foods maybe to try and avoid if experiencing low mood. And again, if you're experiencing high levels of stress, a bit like with the caffeine, try and cut back on the sugar intake because again, sugar is a stimulant. It's kicking your central nervous system into gear. That's something to try and avoid as much as possible. So again, there's lots of self-help techniques out there, folks. Again, our programs go into these in a lot more detail. I'll be sending you links following this presentation that will take you on a bit of a journey where you can find out more about some of these areas. So again, if there's any of these areas that have touched on for you as an individual, particularly, there'll be other information coming through that you can maybe find out more about those and take that a little bit further. And the final thing to mention this stage, folks, is one of the most important self-help techniques, and that's having the ability to ask someone for help. Being able to talk with someone and share what's going on with you is so important and also so challenging for some people. So that's why it's something we try and promote and encourage as much as possible. Going back to that little circle of people that we trust and have those connections with, having someone like that that you're able to pick the phone up and have a conversation with is absolutely vital. If you're experiencing low mood or high levels of stress and you just need someone to share that with, hopefully there's someone there. And if you don't, we will be steering you to other areas externally where you can get contact with someone who will be willing to have that conversation with you. If you don't feel comfortable, for example, talking with someone who's really close to you or one of your friends or colleagues, there are other options out there. And again, we will be sending you information on that as well. One of the best options for that, by the way, folks, is the Lifeline, and you've probably seen the Lifeline number before. And it's a very easy number to remember once you get it in your system. The great thing about Lifeline, people associate Lifeline with people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, which is exactly true, but their remit is much wider than that. They will have a discussion with anyone who's experiencing an issue around mental health or someone who's actually caring for someone or supporting someone with mental health, but it's impacting them as well. So their remit is much wider. Lifeline will also come out to any organization and do a little 30-minute presentation that cover all their services as well. So again, that might be something from an organizational point of view that might be quite useful. And of course, folks, your GP is still the first protocol if you need that extra help and support. We recognize that the statutory services are stretched and they don't have the resources they need. So the sooner you get into the GP, get that referral into whatever service might be the best way forward for you. And then organizations like Aware, like we're here to assist you in filling in those gaps in the services that we provide. And so just to finish off, folks, we'll look a little bit at some of those services before we wrap up. We run currently up to 25 support groups throughout Northern Ireland. Aware actually began with our support groups. Support groups are very much one of our core services, and they operate throughout Northern Ireland, and they're designed for people who are experiencing mental health issues to come together, to share experiences. They focus on a peer support model. They've proven to be extremely successful and really popular. There's people who would come to their support groups sort of religiously every week, and then they've other people who maybe just drop in once in a while just to catch up with people if maybe they're having a bit of a bad time and they just want to touch base with people. So again, it's a complete open door policy. You can come and go as you please. These support groups are scattered throughout Northern Ireland, and we also run online support groups as well if you're in an area where you find it difficult to get to one of the physically attend a support group. So again, we'll be sending you links to follow on this. All the information on our support groups is available on our website as well. There's a little interactive map. You can find out where the nearest one is for you. So again, useful information maybe for yourself or someone you might know. We also run a full range of education and training programs, folks. Everything from kind of 1 hour awareness information sessions like we're doing this morning, right through to 6-week cognitive behavioral therapy based programs that are much more comprehensive, go into things in much more detail. We have programs for people of all ages, from primary school right through to elder years, everything in between, and all the information for these is also available on our website, and again, we'll send you follow-up information on those. From an organizational point of view, folks, we also have a very specific tailored portfolio of workplace wellbeing training programs and workshops, and if that's something that you think your organization would benefit with, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you around those. For example, this 1 hour presentation is based on our Mood Matters Workplace program, which is our general mental health awareness program. We also have more tailored programs that focus on managers, team leaders, supervisors, anybody who might find themselves in a position where they need to support staff, team members, and the Support and Employee Wellbeing program is designed to do just that. We have mental health first aid, which is the PHA certified 12-hour program that's delivered in sort of 30 or 40 countries worldwide. That can, if you have mental health champions in your workplace and they want to receive further training on how they can support others, especially people who are in a crisis situation or experiencing suicidal ideation, mental health first aid is the perfect course for that. We have a series of standalone workshops on mindfulness, as I mentioned earlier, stress management, on helpful thinking. So, from a workplace point of view, we do our best to tailor our offerings based on the needs of the organization. So if it's something that you're interested in, we hope we have a solution to meet the needs of any organization out there, depending on what the sector is. We also have an e-learning platform called I Am Aware. So again, from a workplace point of view, if having people in for traditional training methods is challenging for you, we have an e-learning platform with 4 learning modules based on a lot of these programs that I just mentioned. So again, that's a great option for people and organizations who maybe want their staff to access that type of training and learning, but maybe can't release people for 2-3 hours at a time just because of how the organization works. So again, lots of information. If you're interested in that, I focus on the workplace wellbeing side of things for Aware. More than happy to take that conversation forward with you if that's beneficial. And finally, folks, I'm just going to mention, thanks very much for coming along to this free webinar today. It's remiss of me not to mention that Aware we are a charity, and like most charities, we have a fabulous fundraising department who, without them, we couldn't deliver what we deliver. It's just as simple as that. So if anybody's interested in making a donation to Aware today or at any point in the future, you can do it in a number of ways, including by texting the number on the screen right now. If you're a part of an organization and you'd like to get involved from in some of our events that run throughout the year, or maybe have a conversation about how you become a corporate partner, again, we'd be more than happy. We'd be delighted to have that conversation with you. We have a corporate partner team, and I say our fundraising team would be more than happy to support you with that every step of the way. So if it's something you feel that you can do or would like to do, please get in touch, and we'd be more than happy to help you with that as much as we can. And folks, that's just about it for this morning. Hopefully there's been no technical issues for anybody, but if there have been, as I said, we have been recording the session, and we will be sending out copies of the presentation along with our follow-up email later today, tomorrow, and then this session will be hosted on our website going forward, so we can send you an indicator of that as well. Like I say, if you'd like to find out more about any of our services, any of our workplace training programs, how they operate, more than happy to have that conversation and take it forward with you. But for now, thank you very much for coming along this morning. I hope that was useful for you. And if you need any other information in the future, please get in touch.